The knock came at 6 in the morning. Debbie had been in the particular light sleep of someone who had packed clothes the night before, and was therefore technically prepared for the morning, but had not quite reconciled themselves to the morning arriving as early as it intended to. She came awake at the first knock with the specific instant alertness of a mother whose body had learned over years to respond to unexpected sounds at unusual hours, without the gradual negotiation that waking from deep sleep ordinarily required. She sat up, listened. Then she understood what the knock meant and got up. She had known her ex-husband was coming. Had known it the way you know things that are scheduled and agreed upon and communicated through the specific, efficient language of two people who had decided that the most important thing they shared was the person who had come from both of them and who deserved to move between them without friction. She had known he was coming. She had not known he was coming at 6 in the morning. She opened the door. He stood on the porch with the specific expression of a man who understood that 6 in the morning was early and had decided that understanding it was sufficient acknowledgement without requiring an apology for it. Debbie looked at him for a moment. Then she said she was awake and that she would get Dolly up. Dolly, when Debbie went to her room and touched her shoulder, opened her eyes with the specific cheerful immediacy of a morning person, which she had always been, even as a small child, even in circumstances that gave her no particular reason to greet the day with enthusiasm. She was simply wired for mornings in the way that certain people are wired for mornings, and no amount of late nights or difficult days had ever successfully argued her out of it. She was dressed in the time it took Debbie to pour a glass of water and drink half of it. Backpack on. Running to the door. Debbie caught her at the threshold and kissed her. Held her face for a moment the specific way mothers hold their children's faces when they are about to release them into the world for a stretch of time and want to hold the image of them clearly before the image gets fuzzy with distance. Dolly went down the front walk and took her father's hand, and they disappeared off the street, the way people disappear off streets when the street curves or the block ends and there is simply no more of them visible. Debbie stood in the doorway and watched until they were gone. Then she closed the door. She knew sleep wouldn't come back immediately, knew it with the specific resigned certainty of a woman who had learned her own rhythms well enough to stop arguing with them. The house was quiet in the particular way of a house that has recently had a child in it and now doesn't, a different quality of quiet from ordinary quiet, carrying within it the specific absence of a particular kind of energy that nothing else produces. She made coffee. Found a donut in the refrigerator, left from a box that had been there since Jackie had been in and out of this house, with her flat boxes and her selections. She sat in the living room with the coffee and the donut and the newspaper folded open to wherever she had left it, and let the morning move around her at its own pace. 1 hour. 2 hours. Sleep did not return. By 8 o'clock, the coffee was gone and the donut was gone and the newspaper had been read as thoroughly as it was going to be read, and the morning had become the kind of morning that has too much quiet in it and not enough information to fill the quiet with. She had not heard from Reeves, had not heard from Jackie, had not heard from anyone connected to the situation that had been building across the last several weeks, the situation she had been taking notes on, documenting carefully in the specific organized way she documented everything that mattered. She waited another 15 minutes. Then something shifted in her thinking. She had been so occupied with what Reeves had been telling her, with writing it down and organizing it and understanding the connections between the pieces he brought her, that she had never fully turned her attention to what she actually knew about Joshua herself. The things he had told her directly. The things she had observed. The things she had felt in the specific intuitive way she felt things about people, which was a form of information she had learned to take seriously even when it resisted documentation. She didn't know much about him. Not really. Not really. She knew what he had told her, which was a version of a life, and she knew that versions of lives were not the same as lives. She knew the foster care system had touched him. She knew the streets had touched him. She knew Debbie's kitchen had fed him and her couch had held him, and her instincts had said something about him from the beginning that she had trusted without fully examining. She stood up, walked to the phone stand. The yellow pages were underneath it, where they always were, where she always kept them. The specific organized accessibility of a woman who understood that information was only useful if you could reach it when you needed it. She had the Valentine case files in her notepad, had the details Reeves had given her written in her careful handwriting across multiple pages. She flipped through them until she found what she was looking for. The adoption agency. Love Fellowship Adoption Agency. She found it in the yellow pages. Ran her finger down the column until the number appeared. Picked up the phone and dialed. It rang 4 times. The operator answered with the specific professional pleasantness of someone whose job was to be the first voice a person heard when they called and who understood that the first voice mattered. Debbie said, "I'm calling about some information on a child that was once in your care. His name is Joshua Terrell." The operator asked her to repeat the name. She hadn't heard it clearly. Debbie spoke up. "Joshua Terrell." The operator put her on hold. The specific particular hold music of institutions that have hold music played through the receiver. And Debbie stood at the phone stand and waited with the patient attention of a woman who had learned that waiting was sometimes the most active thing available to her. A couple of minutes passed. The operator came back. "Are you a relative?" she asked. Debbie knew she wasn't. She knew it with the complete clarity of a woman who understood exactly what she was and what she was not in relation to the young man who had sat on her couch and eaten at her table, and talked to her in the specific, guarded, careful way of someone who had learned not to give too much of himself away to people who hadn't earned it yet. "Yes," Debbie said. "I'm his sister." A pause on the other end. The specific pause of someone preparing to deliver something that required preparation. "I'm sorry to inform you of this tragic news," the operator said, "but Joshua Terrell was murdered 12 years ago." Debbie pulled the receiver away from her ear. She looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something that has just told you something your mind is not yet ready to fully receive. Then she set it down in its cradle without saying goodbye, without any of the small social formalities that ordinarily concluded a phone call, because the social formalities were not available to her at this moment. She stood at the phone stand. The words moved through her body in the specific way that shocking information moves through a body before the mind has finished processing it. Physically first, a trembling starting somewhere in the center of her and moving outward. The specific full body response of a system that has received something it doesn't know what to do with yet. Then the emotions arrived, not one at a time, but all together. The specific simultaneous arrival of anger and confusion and hurt, and something that she could only describe as the particular feeling of having been fooled by someone she had cared for, which was its own category of wound, distinct from all the others. She stood there and let it move through her. Then she sat down on the couch. Let her heart begin its slow negotiation back toward a pace that was compatible with thinking. She needed answers. She needed them from the one person who had brought this young man into her life and into her home and into the care she had given him without reservation, because of a feeling on the inside had asked her to, and because something in the young man himself had asked her to without using words. She reached for the phone. Dialed Jackie's house. It rang and nobody answered, and Debbie set the phone down and sat with the unanswered ringing and the trembling that had not fully subsided, and the question that had replaced every other question in her mind. Who was that boy? She waited, sat in the living room of her house and waited, the way she waited when there was nothing else to do but wait. With the specific disciplined patience of a woman who had learned that some things could not be rushed toward without being damaged in the rushing. 15 more minutes. Then she reached for the phone again and dialed Jackie's number again, and this time it rang 3 times, and Jackie answered. Jackie had been sitting on the corner of the bed in the room she had given to Reeves. She had been sitting there for a while before the phone rang, in the specific still way of someone who is not doing anything, because the thing they are waiting to do has not yet become available to do. Reeves was in the bathroom. She could hear him through the closed door. She was sitting on the corner of the bed with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the floor, and the specific quality of a woman who had things to say and was waiting for the person she needed to say them to come back through the door. The phone rang. She answered it on the third ring and heard Debbie's voice. Jackie had known Debbie long enough and well enough to read the specific register of that voice the way she read most things she had been paying attention to long enough, with immediate accuracy and without needing to hear much of it before she understood what it was telling her. The worry was there. The frustration was there. Something underneath both of them that was heavier than either and had not yet been named. Jackie screamed for Reeves. Not loudly in the dramatic sense, in the specific loud of a woman calling through a closed door to a man who needed to hurry because something on the other end of a phone required him. The bathroom door opened. Reeves came out with the specific expression of a man who had been in the middle of something and had been interrupted, and was in the process of deciding whether the interruption was warranted. Jackie held the phone out to him. He took it, pressed it to his ear, and heard Debbie's voice coming through the receiver in the specific fragmented way of someone whose words were not yet fully organized into the shape of sentences, because the thing they were trying to describe had not yet settled into a shape that sentences could contain. He heard enough of it. He heard the specific quality underneath the fragmented words, the trembling in it, the shock and the anger, and the thing underneath both that he recognized immediately as the sound of someone who had received information that changed what they understood about something they had trusted. He said one thing: "We're on our way." He hung up, looked at Jackie. She was already moving. They came out of the house together and locked the door behind them and got into the Buick LeSabre at the curb, the faded olive car that had carried Reeves across the city in the dark of the previous night and had been sitting at Jackie's curb since his return in the early hours of the morning. Reeves drove. Jackie sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap, and neither of them spoke, because the speaking could wait until they understood what they were going toward. And right now they were simply going toward it as fast as the roads between here and there would allow. 7 minutes faster than the speed limit would have produced. Debbie's street appeared ahead of them, and Reeves pulled to the curb, and Jackie had the door open before the car had fully stopped. The specific urgency of a woman who had heard what she needed to hear in a phone call and had spent the drive over in the particular suspended state of someone preparing themselves for a situation whose exact nature they do not yet fully know. She was out. Reeves followed closely behind. They went to the door and knocked. It moved. Not dramatically, just shifted slightly, the specific movement of a door that had not been fully latched and had therefore responded to the knock with a gentle swing inward, rather than the solid resistance of a properly closed door. Debbie noticed it from the couch. Reeves noticed it. Both of them registering simultaneously the specific fact of a door that had been left open in a house that had recently had a child in it, and had recently also had the kind of activity around it that made a properly latched door a matter of some importance. Reeves remembered how easy it had been to enter the house, the door not resisting. He looked at Debbie on the couch. Then he looked at the hallway, at the direction of Dolly's bedroom. "Are you telling me someone took your daughter?" Reeves asked. Debbie looked at him with the expression of a woman who has more than one thing to communicate and is choosing which one to give first. She took a drink from her coffee mug. Exhaled. "I decided to call the adoption agency that Joshua was a part of," she said. "When I reached out to them, they told me Joshua Terrell was murdered 12 years ago." The room was very quiet. "So who was that young man in your house?" Reeves asked. Debbie looked at him. "I don't know," she said. Reeves stood up. He began to pace. The specific back-and-forth movement of a man whose body has decided that stillness is not compatible with what is happening inside it. Left, then right. The living room not large enough for pacing of the serious variety, but receiving it anyway because there was nowhere else for it to go. Jackie watched him from the side of the room. Debbie watched him from the couch. They could see it, building. The specific visible accumulation of stress in a man whose body had recently been in a hospital bed and whose doctor had said in plain language that stress was one of the things that had put him there. His jaw, his shoulders, his hands, which had been open at his sides and were now closing, the fingers finding each other and forming fists in the specific involuntary way of a man whose body is doing something his mind hasn't sanctioned. The ladies looked at each other. Jackie moved first. She crossed the room quickly and stopped in front of Reeves, not touching him, just being there, her presence in his path a different kind of instruction from anything words could produce. He stopped. Looked at her. Debbie came off the couch and took his arm and guided him back to it, not forcefully, with the specific gentle insistence of a woman who understood that insistence and force were different things, and that this moment required the former rather than the latter. He sat. Jackie went to the dining room and came back with a chair, placed it in front of the couch, and Reeves put his feet up on it without being asked. The specific resigned acceptance of a man who has been through enough of this particular dynamic in the last several weeks to understand that resisting it costs more than accepting it. Debbie sat beside him, took his hand, rested her head against his shoulder, in the specific quiet way of someone communicating through proximity rather than words, that whatever was happening, he was not in it alone. Jackie went to the kitchen. The refrigerator opened. She found the orange juice and poured a small cup, the specific, careful small cup of someone who understood that what was needed was not a large amount of anything, but a manageable amount of the right thing. Then she saw the donut box on the counter. She opened it with the automatic assessment of a woman who had spent decades around donuts and knew immediately from the look and the smell what was in one and who had made it. It wasn't her work. She could see that plainly. The jelly donut sitting in the box had the specific quality of something made by someone else, which itself told her something about whose house she was in and how long that box had been sitting on that counter. But it was a jelly donut, and Reeves was sitting on a couch with his fists unclenched now, but his jaw still tight and his body still carrying the visible weight of information that had hit him harder than either of the women in the room had been prepared for. She put the last jelly donut on a paper towel, carried it out with the orange juice, set both of them in front of Reeves with the specific, quiet efficiency of a woman who understood that sometimes the most useful thing you could do for a person was give them something to hold on to, while the larger things sorted themselves out. Reeves looked at the donut, then at the orange juice, then at nothing in particular. The room held all three of them in the specific quiet of a situation that had produced a question none of them could yet answer. Debbie's head against his shoulder, Jackie in the chair across from them, the donut on its paper towel, the orange juice in its small cup, the morning light through the windows doing its ordinary work on a living room where something extraordinary had just landed. Joshua Terrell was murdered 12 years ago. So who had been sleeping on Debbie's couch? Who had been in the safe houses? Who had been drawing Carmen's face on yellow construction paper in the upstairs bedroom of a white house that looked abandoned from the street and wasn't? Who had Reeves been protecting? The question sat in the middle of the room and none of them had an answer for it, and the morning was not going to provide one, and the donut and the orange juice and the handheld and the head on the shoulder were the only things available to hold against the weight of not knowing. Reeves picked up the orange juice, drank it, set the cup down, looked at the donut. Outside, the city continued its morning business without knowledge of or interest in the question sitting in a living room on a residential street, unanswered and heavy and pointing towards something that none of the three people in the room were yet ready to look at directly, but that all of them understood was coming. Whether they were ready for it or not.